Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication here at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is J M DeMatteis, who is a writer whose long career includes noted runs on the Justice League and Spider-Man, the author of Kraven's Last Hunt. J M, welcome to Comic Culture.
Happy to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about the Justice League. You have a writing partnership with Keith Giffen, and I was just wondering how that collaboration sort of came about. I know you were on the Justice League the last few issues of the Detroit era, and then you sort of continued on to the relaunch in the late 1980s, and continued on for, I guess, about 4 or 5 years. And just wondering how that,
5 years, yeah.
How that relationship worked.
You know, in the beginning, there really wasn't a relationship. That's what's so funny. Keith and I are so sort of wedded together now in people's minds. You know, they think we're like a writing team that sits in the same room and goes over the script that way. But the way it really started was, as you said, I was finishing up the previous incarnation of the Justice League, and they were launching this new Justice League, which was Keith's passion, and our editor was Andy Helfer, one of the best editors to ever work in the business. And originally, Keith was going to write it himself, and he had never written anything solo before, and I think he basically had a mild panic attack and didn't think he could do it. I think he was more than capable of doing it. So Andy said, could you come and do the dialogue, and, you know, Keith will do the plots, you'll be the dialogue guy, and I did it strangely in the beginning, kind of reluctantly, like, oh, okay, you know, it was one of those things, I'll do this, it's another gig, but I really think Keith can do it himself. No, we want you to do it. No, but Keith can do it. And so it was this the kind of thing that went on, and I think it took me 4 or 5 issues writing it before I began to realize that something really good was happening, you know? But again, it was happening in sort of glorious isolation. Keith was doing his plots, I was doing the script, and Andy was the guy in between coordinating everything. And of course, we had Kevin McGuire with these phenomenal artwork, the best acting, I think, visual acting ever seen in the pages of a comic book from Kevin. And I say this to people, and it's true, for the 5 years that we did this, you know, Keith and I clearly got to know each other. We became friends, but we'd only see each other in the office every couple of weeks. We'd go have lunch with Andy. We'd go up on Friday when the checks came down. But it wasn't like we were constantly on the phone, like we were sitting there in the same room working together. But that was the amazing thing with Keith, was there was no ego on his part. He turned in the plot, and I could do whatever I wanted with the script. I could invert the whole story. I could turn it sideways. I could add little bits. I could change the characters. And he would then build on that and do amazing, strange, surprising things that he would throw back at me. And it became kind of like a game of tennis back and forth. But, you know, it was a constant deadline. We were doing, you know, Justice League and Justice League Europe and Justice League Quarterly and Justice League Your Mother and Justice League Your Father. And it went on for that way for 5 years, and then we were done. And we didn't think twice about it. You know, we knew the books were a big hit. But honestly, I don't think any of us thought, what a great team, what great chemistry. We must continue to do this together forever, anything like that. And in fact, 10 years went by where we didn't work together again. And then we got back together for formerly known as the Justice League, and it explains how dense we all are. That's when we finally went, wow, this is really fun. We really have something here together. And I've worked with Keith regularly since then, and with Kevin, the two of us with Kevin quite a bit also. And that's when things really shifted. And, you know, now when Keith and I work together, we're on the phone during the week. We talk a couple of times. You know, we're always, it's a different thing now. We're still not sitting in the same room. We're still working in glorious isolation. He'll tell me what's going on in a plot, and then he'll change it. And by the time I get it, I look and see what it is. And then I write something, and I change it, and we build that way. But we're communicating about it along the way. But the fun of it is that we're both then, once we're sitting down working individually, we're both free to completely ignore the other and do whatever the hell we want, you know? And I think that tension is what kind of makes whatever this thing is that we have, whatever this chemistry is. You know, I've seen it in comics. Just as it is in life, there has to be chemistry between the creators. I've written stuff and worked with really good artists, and yet there's no chemistry. And so the words and the pictures hit the page, and it just sort of dies there. Good art, good story, and somehow it doesn't work. And then other artists, I work with them, and from the first panel, the first day, something clicks and you're off, you know?
So, from what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Keith would sort of thumbnail the book rather than write out a plot. So he was doing a lot of
like little mini comics.
And then you would sort of look at that and
I basically, because for instance, you know, in recent years we've worked a lot with Howard Porter on Justice League 3000 and 3001. Now we're doing this very bizarre Scooby Apocalypse book for DC, which is a a very strange inversion of Scooby-Doo. And so Keith draws these little mini comics, and I basically dialogue from his little mini comics. And then Howard will get the script and with my dialogue and bounce off of that. And that's the way we work. I love Keith. Keith is one of the best visual storytellers I've ever worked with. Even when he does these little comics, which are just really basic breakdowns, but everything is clear as a bell. It's like Kirby. You can't miss it. All the storytelling is so clear. And he has little notes, just like Kirby, little notes in the corner about what's going on, and then I just take it and run with it from there. And the beauty of an artist like Howard Porter is that on one hand, he follows Keith's layouts to the letter, and yet manages to bring so much of himself and his own ability to it that it becomes something else entirely, even while he's following what's there.
Well, it's interesting because what I've noticed in one of the books that I like to go to comic shows or conventions and look for issues of are the Justice League run that you worked on.
Right.
I purchased some, and then, for whatever reason, you miss an issue here or there. So I like to go through the long boxes. And what I've discovered is when you look from Kevin McGuire's work to, I think Adam Hughes was one of the artists, and
Right.
I think Bart Sears for a while.
Bart Sears was on Europe, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That there's that, I guess, storytelling continuity, because I guess they're working off those penciled breakdowns.
And even when they're changing it in reaction to what Keith put on the page. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, in a way, even when they're changing it, his voice is still there. Kevin, as he went along, injected more and more of his particular style of visual storytelling, which again is all about the acting. So you'll see as the book went along, and certainly when we got to formerly known as the Justice League, I'll write a bunch of dialogue, and suddenly the way Kevin drew it is there'd be like 12 panels of close-ups of faces, and each face with a different expression, a different reaction, a different gesture. But other people follow Keith really, really precisely. For someone like Kevin or Adam Hughes, who's really gifted, when they go off script a little bit with the layouts, you can trust them. It's okay. But I'd say the general rule would be, when people don't follow Keith's stuff, I always say Keith's stuff is better, because the clarity of his storytelling is just impeccable, really impeccable. Keith is, I always say this, for my generation of comic book creators, he's the closest thing to a Jack Kirby that I've ever encountered. I mean, he's so talented, and stories just sort of like blow out of the top of his head. And if you didn't like that story, wait 30 seconds and another story will blow out the top of his head.
You mentioned formerly known as Justice League, and I was just rereading that recently, and there's just that one page, I'm not sure if it was the first series or the second series, where they're coming back from hell, and there's a Guy Gardner and fire are trying not to look back.
Right.
And it's just a series of close-ups and just the expression on their faces. As a writer, when you see something like that, if you've got dialogue in mind, are you just sort of revising it because the art tells the story, 1,000 words, pictures?
That's the beauty of when you're working what's called Marvel style plot first, and then you get the art and you dialogue from the art, or you have the art to react to. Because sometimes, the classic example for me was the Spider-Man story I did with Sal Buscemi years ago, where featured the death of Harry Osborn at the end, the Harry Osborn Green Goblin. And I had worked out this whole sequence at the end, and my plots were very tight, this is going on and that's going on. And in my head, this was going to be Schmaltz City. I was going to really melodrama it up, and lots of verbiage and lots of speeches and whatever else. And Sal turned in the pages, and I looked at the last 3 or 4 pages, and all the emotion, everything I had communicated in my plot was right there in the pictures. And if you pick up that issue and look at it, the last 3 pages, I think, don't have a single word on it. Because everything I asked him for, he gave me. Why ruin it? But that's part of the job. Part of the job is I'm very good at running off at the mouth. If you read that stuff, the dialogue is all over the place, fill in the panels. But it's really an important part of the job is also knowing when to shut the hell up and let the pictures tell the tale.
Your run on the Justice League was known for having a sense of humor.
Right.
And I think a lot of people sort of confuse the fact that it's an adventure book that has a very 80s sensibility, where if you saw a Schwarzenegger film from that time period, he would make, sort of the one-liner in between all the action. And people sort of look at the Justice League as more of a comedy book than an adventure book that has a few humorous moments in there. And you worked with characters that may have been envisioned differently by their creators. I'm thinking of Booster Gold or Guy Gardner. And you sort of gave these characters a personality that was well beyond what they had been, and sort of gave them a little bit more life. And I'm just wondering, when you're approaching a character that maybe you know Dan Jurgens, you see him in the office or something like that, are you ever hearing back, hey, I like what you did with the character, or I don't like what you did with that character, or something along those lines?
Back in the 80s, and this is the beauty of working with an editor like Andy Helfer, I think there was a lot of rumbling around the office. What are these guys doing to our characters, kind of stuff. But Andy did what a good editor is supposed to do. He protected us from that. We didn't deal with that. We didn't hear it. We just did our stories. And if there was another editor to go have a fight with or a discussion or whatever, Andy took care of that. Sometimes you'd see some character would show up in our book and an issue later, suddenly they'd be gone. I'm sure that was somebody pulling the string, yanking them back. But we never had to deal with that. And I don't remember, comments either way about we loved what you did or we hated what you did. And again, those books at that time, we were like a whole massive franchise for DC. They were a bunch of their top-selling books were our Justice League books, so they weren't going to fiddle with us too much. And when they were, we had Andy there to protect us.
So when you have a character, somebody with a personality that the readers can identify with, who sort of, I guess, as they evolve in your writing, they sort of learn, I'm thinking of the arc of Guy Gardner throughout the story, and I'll just use that as the example, how he starts off as sort of a blowhard Rambo type, and then we find out that he's a little bit of a buffoon, but then we find out he's got this softer side. How does the character help you create the story?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. The characters do create the story. We didn't sit down and put our heads together and go, Beetle and Booster, they'll be a great team. They'll be a team that'll last for the next 25 years. What happens is, Keith will set up a scene, I'll start to write dialogue, and something happens between the characters. Just as there's chemistry between people, between writers and artists, there's chemistry between the characters. And I get them talking, or, Keith sets up the situation, I get them talking, and something clicks or it doesn't. So the two characters over here that you thought were going to be the team and the big breakout aren't. And suddenly Beetle and Booster start talking to each other. Or Guy and Fire and Ice. And suddenly you see, wait a minute. And that's the great moment as a writer. You go, oh, wait a minute, I didn't realize these two like each other. So the best part of writing for me is when the story surprises me. I think I'm doing one thing, the characters rear up and do something else, and you go, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And if I'm surprised, I figure the readers are going to be surprised. And certainly with that group of characters, it was all about the chemistry. It was all about how they built the relationships, and then Keith and I would follow them. We weren't leading the characters were leading us.
So basically you could take those personalities and put them into different situations, and they would sort of come through it because they have it's not just we're going to solve the problem, it's sort of they're going to work out their own struggles to figure it out. And
right.
It sort of made it interesting as a reader, because you never knew, well, you knew that they would always pull through because their names were on the book. But it was more about how they're going to deal with each other later on, and that was part of the fun of reading a book like that. I think one of the biggest surprises you are, I guess, credited for would be the death of Kraven in Kraven's Last Hunt, which was sort of an event before comics were really doing an event every 3 or 4 days.
It was an event, and we didn't know it was an event until it came out, really. If that story had come out now, they would have asked me to make it 15 parts and crossed over into 20 other books. Luckily, we just got to tell our story and get out. It became an event in retrospect.
I remember it was 2 books a week, or 2 books a month rather, that were coming out to tell the story as quickly as possible.
I was supposed to be writing. I think there were 3 Spider-Man books at the time, and I was supposed to be writing Spectacular Spider-Man. And I came up with this story, which I pitched to my editors. And then Jim Salicrup, who was the second editor that worked on it, said, we can't have Spider-Man dead and buried in the ground in one book while he's running around in 2 other books, alive and well. It'll completely, gut the story and take all the drama and the tension out of the story. So he was the one, I think he was the first one that ever did it. He took this one story and ran it through all 3 books for 2 months. So, and I think that really helped create the event mentality around it, because it was the first time every Spider-Man book had one single story by one creative team. And, to me, it was just a cool story. I didn't think I was doing anything special or something that we'd be talking about 25 or whatever it is, 30 years later. It was another story. It was a good story. I love working with Mike Zack. But, no one ever sits down and thinks, ooh, I think I would create a classic. It doesn't work that way, whether it's in comics or in literature. No one thinks that way. And I think if anyone does think that way, it's almost a guarantee that they're not going to create a classic unless they're such a genius that they can do it like that by will.
Now, it's interesting because in that story, we sort of sympathize a lot with Kraven. We get into, I guess, his psychosis, his
childhood, really, and what the demons that drive him. Yeah, what created him.
So in a sense, basically, even though the title of the book is Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, or Spectacular Spider-Man, really we're watching the character, the villain, more than we're watching the hero. And the hero's journey is, I guess, sort of the subplot in many ways, or I guess a parallel to the stronger Kraven storyline. So is that something that when you're developing a story, you're thinking about? Obviously, a character has to learn something, but there's only so much the hero can learn because their name's on the book. So just how would you approach something like that? I realize it's kind of a rambling
question. Well, it's interesting
question.
what you said, because the thing with the hero often, but you always have to look for new ways to get in, is that there's just so far you can take them. You can't take Bruce Wayne, finally give him a breakdown, send him to therapy to get over the death of his parents, and hang up his cape. Much as I would love to write that story, can't do it. And if you do it, you know that 2 months later, someone else is going to undo it anyway. With the villains, there's more of a chance to do that. But I do say, with the iconic characters, with the Spider-Man, with the Superman, or the Batman, maybe you can't completely take it that far. But what you can do is, I imagine like ripping their heads open and looking for parts of their psyche that has never been poked before. Find little corners of that character, of that mythos. But for me, it's always psychologically that's never been touched before. But again, with the villains, there's more leeway. And one of the things that's why I always like the villains, because you get a guy like Kraven who puts on leopard skin pedal pushers and decides he's going to hunt down Spider-Man, So when I teach my writing class, I call this the big why. You have to take a half step back, no matter, because these characters, taken on one level, are completely absurd. They just are. But taken on another level, they're amazing. So you take a step back and you ask why. What brought this guy? What did his mother do to him? What did his father do to him? What trauma did he undergo? And now he's running around Manhattan in this weird outfit with a gun, hunting Spider-Man, and it's the most important thing in his life. And that's what Kraven's Last Hunt was about. Was really about the big why in Kraven's life. And then contrasting the way he deals with his demons, the way that Spider-Man deals with the trauma that happens to him in the story, and this character of Vermin, and how they each approach that character as the balance to contrast the two of them and show the differences between them, But it's a lot of fun. That's for me. Get the shovel out, dig into the psyche. That's the best thing you can do as a writer.
And as a writer in comics, you're dealing with a lot of properties that you really don't get to do too much. Like you were saying, Batman, you can't have Bruce Wayne go to therapy. So in dealing with a property rather than a character that you create, that you can, if you're writing a novel, let's say, you can have the character be the hero and die at the end, and that's that. It's a brilliant novel. So I guess in some ways it's a restriction, but in other ways it forces you as a writer to be more creative. So how do you approach that sort of, I'm working for a company, I've got a character that I know is a property I can't do too much with, and how do
you can do a lot, you can't change the character, you can't change their world, you can't bring them to, it's like a rubber band, you can stretch it just so far and it has to stretch back, because we see over the years, big change, and it always makes its way back. And that's why I said before, for me, it's always about looking at the psychology and the emotional makeup of the character and finding ways and finding corners and finding aspects of those characters that we haven't seen before. Some time back, I did a Superman story, and it occurred to me, if I was this guy, if I was the only survivor of an entire world that had blown up and I was the only one that got out, wouldn't there be survivor's guilt here, And so I built a story around Superman's survivor skills. I don't think anyone had ever done that before, explored that corner of his psyche. So there's always, I'd say you can't get too wide, but you can continue digging deeper and deeper with these characters. So there's always something to do. And if you get hold of a character and you can't find some way to do that, then you shouldn't be writing that character. Move on to the next one, because you have to bring something interesting to the table.
Now, outside of comics, you are. You mentioned classes. You're involved with something known as the Imagination Workshop. What is the Imagination Workshop?
I started this maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I don't do them as much as I'd like, but I'm going to be doing another one in May or June. So if anyone's interested, they can go to my website, which is jmdemateis.com, and I have a page about the classes, and I'll put up the dates and where it's happening. But basically, you do this long enough, and you wake up one morning and you realize that you know a lot of stuff about this. I've been writing comics and writing television and animation and all these things for years, and story has been my life. And really, you want to give back and you want to share that. So it's a 3-day workshop where I discuss both the nuts and the bolts and the metaphysics of writing. Because to me, it's not just the craft. There really is a magical, mystical aspect to what we do, a sort of tapping into another dimension and opening that little doorway and letting that pour into this dimension and us being the channels to get it out there. So I talk about all those aspects from the really, really practical stuff of, script formats and how to deal with editors and all these things to, where do our ideas come from and how do we translate these visions into, everything. And it's really, really fun. And I have to say, every class I've done, it's brought a great group of people. We keep the class small, maybe at most 10 people. So it's a really intimate weekend. And by the end of the weekend, we all really get to know each other, and it's really comfortable. By the last day, we're building a story together using all the things we talked about the first 2 days. And it's been a lot of fun. And then what I sometimes do is with a group that finishes the first level of the class, we'll do a second level of the class, which is much more writing intensive, where it's 4 days, and they spend a good part of those 4 days writing. So it's been really, really fun for me to do that.
And you also have on your website something where you will sort of, I guess, serve as a script doctor. You'll read someone's script.
Or consultation, freelance editing, whatever that may be. If people have a story, if they have a piece of work that they're working on and they would like to work with me developing it, because that's the other thing. I enjoy working with young writers. And by young, I don't mean young in age. You could be 110 and be a new writer and need that feedback and need that encouragement. And so this is another opportunity to meet. I work with people one-on-one. They send me their work. I go over their work. We'll talk over Skype. I'll give them their notes. They'll develop the story. And that's been a lot of fun, too. And that's a little more focused on a specific piece of material as opposed to the more general education that will come up in the workshop.
And I'm imagining a lot of what you're dealing with young writers. I know in my classes, sometimes students have a hard time making that connection where it's something that the character has to learn something, or maybe they're not really resolving the plot. It's more about the heist than it is about the people who are pulling off the heist, right, or something like that.
Right.
So are you covering things like just how to get those characters to really figure things out? I'm imagining case by case it's always going to be different, but is there like an overall...
Those are the things we talk about, kind of what we talked about before this, the big why. It's really, how do you do that with a character? How do you excavate a character's psyche? How do you bring that in together with plot and with theme and with all these things, So yeah, basically I kind of try to take, in the most natural way possible, everything that I've learned over the past, whatever it is, 30 or 35 years of doing this, and communicate it in the course of a weekend. Now, it's really important to me. I always say to them the first day, everything I'm about to tell you is true, except when it's not. Because nothing is the truth about anything. Everyone, people give workshops, and it's like, these are the rules, and you follow this, and this is the structure. Yeah, it is, except when it's not. But as one of my early editors said to me, first you learn the rules, then you break the rules. And I always want my students to be free to break the rules that I'm telling them and to digest them and intuitively take the things that resonate with them and mean the most to them and bring that into their own writing. I don't believe that I'm the authority on anything. I think I know a lot of stuff, and I'm happy to share it. But we're all authorities. And really, a class like this is about each person tapping into their own authority, because we're all filled with stories. We're all filled with stories. And I'm always amazed at the talent. Just some random person that walks in the room has been working, some job for 20 years, and 20 years before, so I used to want to write, and I never did, and I got this job, and here I am 20 years later, and suddenly they sit down, and there's all this talent bubbling out of them, and all these ideas bubbling out of them, and all this creativity. And it's really, I always learn something, not just something. I learn a lot of things in the course of these workshops. So I end up walking out learning as much as they do. So it's a real benefit for everybody and a lot of fun.
Well, I do know my personal experience teaching is that I get so much out of my students and their enthusiasm for where they are in the process. And I'm assuming much like you, watching them develop and grow and walk out the door as professionals, or at least getting their foot in the door professionally, it's very rewarding and goes beyond any sort of compensation, which I shouldn't say on TV.
Right. Some of them really in the end don't really even want to be professionals, but they just want to get back to that creative part of themselves and express it, because everybody, I think everybody, whether they realize it or not, has something creative inside them that they want to get out and that they want to express, whether it's through music, whether it's through writing, through dance, whatever it is. And you don't have to be a professional to do that.
And I see we have just a few minutes left before we run out of time. I just wanted to find out, well, I guess what your personal favorite story that you've written that you look back at your 30, 35-year career and say, you know what, I really hit it out of the park.
I could never pick one. In fact, on my website at one point, I have a list of about 10 different stories. So there's like, they're grouped in different, you know, there's the creator-owned stuff, things like Moonshadow or Badazad or Brooklyn Dreams, which was my big autobiographical graphic novel that really mean a lot to me. And I think those are probably the 3 best projects I've ever done. But then you go over to the superhero side of things, and I look at my work on Spider-Man. I look at my work with Keith. I'm very proud of that stuff. So I've done so many different things that it's hard to pick a small group of things. But I would say out of my creator-owned things, probably Brooklyn Dreams, Moonshadow, and Badazad, absolutely. And then probably Spider-Man and my Justice League work. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot, you know, because even the creator-owned stuff, there's been a lot of projects, and I continue to work on that stuff. So, but if I had to pick a bunch right now off the top of my head, those are what I would pick.
And I'm imagining that as you're wrapping up the Justice League 3001 storyline, you've got another story that you're working on. Is there something that we could look forward to in the coming months? We have about a minute or so left.
Well, I just had an animated film that came out for Warner Brothers called Batman Bad Blood. Keith Giffen and I are working on this very fun, strange Scooby Apocalypse book for DC. For IDW, I'm doing a sequel to a creator-owned series I did called The Adventures of Augusta Wynn. This is the further adventures of Augusta Wynn. And I'm working on a TV pilot right now as well for a producer named Dean Devlin, who has done a lot of movies and television. So keeping busy in a lot of different venues, you know, mainstream work, creator-owned work, TV work, animation work, just telling stories.
Well, we've been talking to J M DeMatteis. Thank you so much for being on Comic Culture. It's been my absolute pleasure, and I'd like to thank you for watching the show. We'll see you again next time.